Hello, I am Jennifer Phillips, the program lead for network collaboration on the digital benefits team here at Georgetown's Beck Center for Social Impact and Innovation. And we are thrilled to welcome you to the last in our Summer of CX webinar series today. Our series included 3 webinars, Principles to Improve CX, which was held back on July 15th, last week's CX Metrics for Decision Making, and today's webinar, Improving CX for Benefits Access. All 3 webinars and the materials will be posted on the Beck Center website within the next 2 weeks. And the video and materials from the July 15th webinar are online now, and the link is going to be going in the chat in just a second. We developed this series thinking about all the state, territorial, tribal, and local leaders who are currently working to center customer experience in their agency's work to improve digital access to benefits. While there is excellent information available that's coming from federal agencies, nonprofits, private vendors, we found that when talking to states, there's just not as much information available about how a non-federal agency might get started in centering customer experience in their public benefits agency. Before we get started, we'd like to cover our webinar community norms and logistics. Please note that this event will be recorded. The transcription and slides will be available on the website. Feel free to put questions in the chat, and when we get to the Q&A, please use your raised hand function. Please stay on mute unless you are asking a question. Please be kind and in the chat and respectful in your communication. And if you aren't a subscriber, we encourage you to sign up for our monthly communications, the Digital Benefits Digest and Digital Benefits in the News, and we'll put those links in the chat. To give everyone a sense of who's on the webinar, we'd like to start with a few quick poll questions, and Isabel is going to start that poll right now. We'd like to be able to have the audience see who is coming in from what type of organization, what public benefit program or programs you focus on, and whether you have current federal funding to work on customer experience. Give it another minute for people to participate. It looks like similar to the previous webinars, we've got the majority of people coming in from state government, handful from federal government, and around a third from the nonprofit sector. We've got 50% of folks on the call coming in working on unemployment insurance benefits, about a couple people that are working on SNAP, Medicaid, and TANF, and almost half the people that are either more than one program or a combination of other programs. And about 60% of the folks on the call right now do have federal funding to work on customer experience. Isabel, why don't we end the poll? And I think those poll questions should come up. I know not everybody's responded, but I think we'll keep going. Okay. I'm going to stop sharing the poll and keep us moving forward. For those of you who are new to the Digital Benefits Network, our mission is to support government in delivering public benefit services and technology that are accessible, effective, and equitable in order to ultimately increase economic mobility. We do this through creating peer community, offering responsive and actionable resources, curated resources, offering access to multidisciplinary experts, co-creating proofs of concept and new standards, coordinating and deep listening across the public benefits ecosystem, developing structured learning opportunities such as these webinars, and finally, perhaps most importantly, creating the space to imagine new futures for benefits, policy, and delivery. A wide range of organizations, non-federal organizations, are also contributing to the growing awareness and library of resources on customer experience. These organizations include nonprofits such as the Digital Benefits Network and many others, including trade associations like NASWA and APHSA, public entities, private entities, public benefit corporations. And our hub, the Digital Benefits Hub, is home to nearly 800 different resources, case studies, artifacts, including human-centered design and customer experience. And the link to the Digital Benefits Hub is in the chat. Today's webinar focuses on customer experience aspects related to digital identity. We're really excited to have leaders from the Digital Benefits Network, NIST, Illinois, and New Jersey talking about best practices and lessons learned, making sure that people don't get stuck at the digital front doors of public benefits programs. I'd like to introduce my colleague, Elizabeth Bynum-Sorrell, who is the Senior Research and Engagement Manager for the Digital Benefits Network. She is responsible for researching and amplifying innovative approaches and tools for delivering social safety net benefits, including DBN's signature digital identity dataset that she will talk about in just a moment. Connie LaSalle joins us as the Senior Technology Policy Advisor within the NIST IT Lab. Prior to joining NIST, Connie led the platform program and federal customer success teams at a DC-based startup called Virtu. In the years leading up to this role, Connie served as the lead policy advisor to the Chief Information Officer for the U.S. Department of Justice and led several cybersecurity and IT modernization initiatives within the White House Office of Management and Budget. Beyond her government service, Connie brings several years of industry experience with her to NIST and holds a graduate degree in public policy. Molly Luby is the Special Projects Coordinator in the Illinois Department of Employment Security Director's Office, specializing in project management for the UI modernization funded projects under ARPA. Previously, Molly worked as a UI advocate for IDES and with a political campaign strategy team at the Illinois AFL-CIO, where she worked serving working class families across Illinois. I think, sorry, Isabel, I just want to pause for a second and make sure people are seeing are they seeing my screen or your screen?
We're seeing the presentation.
They are seeing my screen.
Okay, I'm going to
just got set up.
Yep, sharing your screen and share mine. Let me know if we've got the right one on. Perfect. Okay. Apologies about that. Hey, and then last but not least, we have Ruthie McNamee, who's the product lead at New Jersey's Office for Innovation. Ruthie is focused on making unemployment easier for New Jersey residents and staff who serve them using emerging technology and best practices from building software. There we go. Okay. Last month, we kicked off the series talking about what customer experience is, why we should focus on it, and how the executive branch and federal agencies are emphasizing CX, and how 2 state agencies were working on CX. And that was, we had folks from California and Michigan joining us, what difference it makes, and what they think the essential ingredients for successfully getting CX work off the ground are. We started talking about the McKinsey research that shows that a positive experience with government programs can boost trust in government, increase civil service morale, reduce mistakes, lower costs, and lessens overall burdens to people seeking public benefits. We also highlighted the December 2021 White House executive order that sent a powerful message that government should deliver the level of service that the public expects and deserves, and that government management of its customer experience and service delivery should be fundamentally driven by the voice of the customer through human-centered methodologies, empirical customer research, and an understanding of behavioral science and user testing, especially for digital services and other mechanisms of engagement. all of the public benefits we were talking about are part of a federated delivery system where federal agencies guide, but states, territories, tribes, and local governments administer and deliver these benefits. We were so fortunate to have Mai Doe from California EDD, Brett Gleason from Michigan's UI agency, and Rachel Carson from Sevilla sharing how they were using human-centered work to drive customer experience improvements. They shared key success ingredients such as vision, championship, core teams, implementation commitment, resources, community partners, proof points, and more. During the first webinar, we've shared these CX principles, which are not an exhaustive list, but highlight some of the most important ones that center on personalization, consistency, and seamlessness in service delivery. Our second webinar, we had Mo Early from OMB and Sylvie Williams from USDOL, who shared their perspectives on how to collect and use CX metrics to improve processes and technology. And I shared some of the CX collection data and analysis that we were doing at the Illinois Department of Employment Security. My former colleague, Molly Luby, is going to expand on that today. And we talked about all the places where you can capture CX data that can be inputs into those decisions. Mo shared a memorable plumbing metaphor for creating a comprehensive CX metrics picture. This is actually from the OMB guidance. And her metaphor talked about plumbing. And for each stage of the CX metrics path, you can think about how to build the pipes, how to assess when the faucets are on or off, how the water feels, and what the outcomes are in terms of cost savings, cost increases, or other outcomes. Now, I would like to, and the webinar for the video and slides, as I mentioned, will be posted on the website next week. We're very excited to turn the topic of what customer experience looks like at the digital front doors of public benefits programs today. So without much further ado, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Elizabeth Bynum-Sorrell, to talk about her seminal work on digital identity in public benefits programs. Elizabeth?
Thanks, Jen. Great to be here today. As Jen mentioned, I'm Elizabeth Bynum-Sorrell. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm Senior Manager for Research and Engagement at the Digital Benefits Network. The DBN has been working on digital identity for the past 2 years or so, and our interest in this topic was really motivated by our understanding that account creation and identity proofing requirements, depending on how they're implemented, can become barriers for eligible applicants and beneficiaries. And also by the recognition that state agencies are facing challenges balancing equitable access, privacy, and data security when it comes to thinking about that digital front door for an interaction with a state benefits administering agency. I'm super excited for today's webinar. We've been thinking here at the DBN a lot about how to conceptualize digital identity from a customer experience and a service design perspective. So I'm really eager myself and for all of you to hear from our great speakers from Illinois and New Jersey, and to pass things off to my colleague Connie to provide more context on digital identity and the work of the National Institute of Standards and Technology. But I'd like to very quickly introduce some of the work that the DBN has done on digital identity so far, and what we plan to do going forward. So as we've mentioned, we've been working on this topic since mid-2022. And one of the first things we did when we were starting our work was attempt to get a landscape understanding of what digital identity approaches looked like across all online benefits applications nationally. So in late 2022 and early 2023, in collaboration with Code for America, we conducted research to document identity proofing and authentication practices in initial online applications for 6 programs: SNAP, TANF, Magi Medicaid, WIC, childcare, and unemployment insurance. And we wanted to do this research in order to create greater understanding of the landscape of digital identity and public benefits, enable states to compare their approach to that being taken elsewhere, and help the ecosystem of federal agencies, advocates, academics, and civic tech organizations identify states that are taking unique, unusual, or potentially promising approaches, as well as identify state applications where there are opportunities for improvements. You can actually stay on that slide. Thanks, Jen. There is a QR code here to access the data set and the accompanying analysis on the Digital Benefits Hub. I believe that's already also been shared in the chat. But a few things that we want to just kind of pull out as quick highlights. We did find that most online public benefits applications are using some type of account creation or registration, but the level of complexity in that registration process really varies. And we did find over 30 applications last year that were using state single sign-ons as that front door for their online benefits application. We can move to the next slide now. We did also find across programs that around a third of applications require or prompt some type of active step for the user to prove their identity. So an active identity proofing requirement through that online application process. This was most common in unemployment insurance applications, with just over half of unemployment insurance applications requiring claimants to take some type of active step to prove their identity online. I think it's also important to pull out that the methods that are being used for identity proofing really vary between unemployment insurance and other program applications. So we found that just over 20 state workforce agencies were using biometrics as a method for asking claimants to prove their identities, which involves uploading an image of your face and a photo ID. We didn't find during this research in 2023 any evidence that biometrics were being used for other safety net programs at that time. In those other programs, so SNAP, TANF, WIC, Medicaid, and childcare, when we did see online identity proofing as part of an application process, we were seeing knowledge-based verification being used. And I'm sure we'll talk a lot more about what some of the differences between these approaches are during the rest of this session. One thing I do want to call out is that this data is all point in time, and we're actually making updates to this research project right now with the help of our great Georgetown students, including Isabel, who is on today's call, helping with some of the back-end support. And we'll be publishing that updated research later this fall. And I want to also pull out that after our initial publication, we got a lot of questions about what states should be doing when they're thinking about digital identity. In our initial work, we were able to identify some promising design patterns that we observed in state benefits applications, particularly around things like optionality for account creation and identity proofing, and offering clear in-person options for identity verification. But we knew that to have the best shot at providing states with tools to answer the question of whether and to what level to use account creation, authentication, and identity proofing, we should work in partnership with other organizations. So with that teaser, I'm going to pass it off to Connie from the National Institute of Standards and Technology, who will share about NIST's work on digital identity. And then I'll pop back on to share a little bit more about how we're actually going to be working together on this topic. Connie, over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Just want to check my audio. Can I get a thumbs up? We're good. Great. Wonderful. Well, it's nice to see a lot of familiar faces, mostly people who probably have not interacted with NIST too much. So I thought I would start things off with an introduction, both to myself, which was already done, but also to NIST specifically. So, starting with NIST's mission, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST, I'll just say NIST from now on, plays a really critical role in the global science, measurement, and standardization ecosystem. We are the nation's leading metrology institute, and our research, measurement services, and standardization efforts give us confidence in everyday living that I would say most of us probably take for granted. These sort of activities are everything from the nutrition of the food that we buy at the grocery store to the safety of our buildings and even the precision of our clocks. I do need to note, however, that NIST is not an oversight or enforcement agency, though we do play a unique role in federal cybersecurity, which I will touch on the next slide, please. So getting a little bit more into the role that NIST plays, I'll get to identity in a minute, but wanted to shape out for you how we view identity, or how we have viewed identity historically. NIST's role in what at one point in time would not have been called cybersecurity, because that's more of a term of art used in the last 15 to 20 years or so, but in computer security really began in 1972 with the development of one particular federal information processing standard. It's called DES. Attacks nowadays could completely thwart DES. We've modernized our standards and approaches since then, but just to give you a sense of for how many decades NIST has been trying to figure out how to make the online world more trustworthy and secure. We've been in the game for a while, and what that has looked like for us really fits into these sort of 4 buckets, if you want to think of that framing for NIST work in cybersecurity. The first, which is our bread and butter, is the development of technical standards, guidelines, and our testing programs. I mentioned the importance of measurement science before. We actually offer services that help people make sure that their tuning is correct, or to validate for them that they have implemented to a standard or to guidelines in a way that's conformant. And it's really to support real world implementations. We do a lot of theoretical and foundational research, but we also do applied research that's a bit newer, and it's something that I'm excited to talk with you guys about here in just a minute. Key to our ability to be successful in developing guidelines that people actually want to adopt is pulling a lot of people in. So it's not just industry, though we do sit in with the Department of Commerce and have a unique role in the federal government as far as our interactions with industry, but it's also academia, it's civil society, it's other governments, both at the subnational level within the United States, but also other countries' governments. We also get tapped quite frequently by people with regulatory or policy-making authority to develop guidelines that are responsive to timely needs. So, for example, our cybersecurity framework, people know quite a bit about, and was developed in response to threats to critical infrastructure in the United States. We also play a role, though, in the promotion of the broader standards ecosystem, and we play a key role in facilitating international trade through the avoidance of unnecessary obstacles to trade. We can have an entire discussion just about the role of standards in trade, but that sounds like a different webinar. So we'll go to the next slide at this point so that you can understand where we specifically play in identity. Oh, if you could go back. Yep, right there. That's great. So when Jennifer asked me to come to this panel and join this panel, she asked, can you give an overview of the kinds of resources that states and others could be using beyond the federal government? So just to give you an idea, I'm going to zoom in further to talk about the digital identity guidelines. But I do want to make you aware of the work that NIST has and the impact that our work can have. Again, I like a bucket, I love a list. And so you can see these 5 distinct buckets of impact that we have. Number 1 is our technical guidance, which we're going to spend the majority of the time on, or at least my time on. The digital identity guidelines, or special publication 800-63, are probably our most well-known guidelines. We also do research into usable cybersecurity and privacy-enhancing technologies. We have accelerator projects, that's that applied side, where we take guidelines or standards that have already been developed and demonstrate how they would be implemented in practice. We also contribute to standards at the global level, but also national, and we develop federal information processing standards. One that's top of mind for me, because it was just announced yesterday that we're actually launching our federal information processing standards, are FIPS 203, 204, and 205 related to post-quantum cryptography, which is basically a revamped set of cryptography standards that are resistant once a quantum computer comes online and could be a threat to today's classical cryptography. That is yet another webinar that we could talk about later. Ping me if you have questions about that one. And last but not least is metrology. I think we're probably best known for Some of the work that we do to evaluate face recognition algorithms as far as our measurement services are relevant for identity. So that just gives you a view of like the wide spanning activities and resources that we have available. But I want to now take some time to zoom in on the digital identity guidelines. Next slide, thanks. So what are they? You might have heard something about them, maybe not, either way. Special Publication 800-63, or the guidelines, as I'll colloquially say, probably for the rest of this panel. They provide the foundational requirements for federal agencies and other organizations to conduct digital identity risk management. It provides key assurance levels for 3 distinct components of an access decision being brokered. We call them identity assurance, authentication assurance, and federation assurance. I know I'm throwing a lot of jargon at you. Bear with me. We're going to dive into these terms in just a minute. And it also provides a framework for evaluating risks to privacy, usability, and equity right alongside security considerations. That's really important framing and context, given that our digital identity program is widespread but mostly concentrated within the cybersecurity divisions of NIST. We thought it was important to pull in other disciplines focused on usability, privacy, and equity so that people have more of a comprehensive view of risk as they're making these decisions. One thing I'll also flag is that while the guidelines were initially developed with federal agencies in mind, managing federal information systems, 800-63 has been adopted by many others globally, and it's increasingly relevant across other sectors, other contexts, other regulatory and policy environments, and types of organizations that are looking to manage digital identity risks. But what do I mean when I say risk? I'm throwing that word out a lot. Let's start by looking at some of the security and fraud related risks on the next slide. So on the left in blue, you'll see what we would call in the cybersecurity realm as tactics, techniques, and procedures, or TTPs. This is like a typology of attacks and the threat actor approaches that you might see that are most relevant today. And on the right side, we've tried to lay out example motivations that a bad actor might have for using those techniques, and procedures. These techniques vary from scams and social engineering to things like SIM swapping. You might be familiar with SIM cards in your phone, or other kinds of device compromise. We've seen biometric spoofing occur and injection attacks. We've also just seen good old-fashioned brute force attempts to get into accounts, and other attacks using automation. There are plenty of as a service threats on the dark web that are accessible and affordable these days. So that's something that we have to keep in mind when designing the guidance. And as far as the motivations, sometimes it's as simple as financial gain. Other times it's a little more complicated, meaning there could be an intent to embarrass an organization or to stop or delay an action or decision from occurring. Motivations are really varied and context specific sometimes. But taking all this and trying to digest it is a lot. So how should an organization that's trying to deliver services online or leveraging online tools even start rationalizing some of this threat environment so that they can manage the risk? That's a key question that I think most federal agencies grapple with, not just on identity, but in enterprise risk management generally. And how would you even know if the risk is likely enough to warrant some kind of intervention? So let's go to the next slide, if you could. So the way that NIST has attempted to just rationalize the security and threat landscape is into these general categories of actions and then levels of risk. So focusing on those categories of action or components, pick a phrase, whatever works for you. At one point in time, all of these were bundled into one identity assurance terminology and set of controls. But we thought, a couple of revisions ago, it might be helpful to break this out into the aspects of a transaction where access is being brokered. So identity proofing is the first one. As far as the digital identity guidelines, there are 4 volumes. The base that sets out risk management, a risk management model, an identity model, and some basic language that are used throughout the volumes. But volume A really focuses on identity proofing. And any controls that are put in place here, should they be warranted, seek to answer the question, who are you? I haven't interacted with you, you don't have an account with me. How do I know with some level of confidence that you are who you say you are? Volume B covers the second component, which is authentication. This is really envisioned to be a case where somebody's returning to their account. And you're asking, are you the same you that I'm pretty sure I proofed before? It gives you confidence that a returning person is the same individual to whom you granted that access initially. And the last topic can be complicated, but I wanted to make sure that we were covering everything. And it's federation. So the simplest way to think of the goal of federation is to ask yourself the question, how do I tell other authorized parties about you? Federation is becoming increasingly important to understand as single sign-on technologies and solutions are coming online. And it allows for the transmission of identity data to trusted partners, both inside and outside of your organization. I think the bottom line to take away from these groupings of assurance levels is that they are intended to provide a baseline of control to achieve a defined set of control objectives. So that brings me to the next slide. What are our objectives here? As you can kind of see, we've tried to lay out objectives by level of risk. So if you look at the far left, identity assurance, authentication assurance, and federation assurance are those sort of buckets of action, components of action that we talked about. But you're not just going to implement the same thing for every context. For example, when an organization determines that there is a low amount of risk, the identity assurance related controls that they implement will be commensurate with that risk level. They won't address highly sophisticated attacks, but they will offer some protection against highly scalable attacks and attacks that leverage stolen PII or its personally identifiable information or synthetic identities. The same can be said if you look across each row relevant for authentication assurance and federation assurance. But that brings me to the next question. How would someone even arrive at a given assurance level? If we go to the next slide, we can start to look at how NIST, through our guidelines, has rationalized the risk management process. We refer to this as the digital identity risk management process. DIRM is not the most interesting acronym, take it or leave it, but that's what it's called for now. And it really envisions risk assessment and decision-making across 2 dimensions. One that has been pretty stable over the various revisions of 800-63. It's risks to the online service that's being used to administer, manage services or other functions. And that, for the most part, focuses on defining the online service, which is new, that builds the business context, an understanding of what processes are already in place, the user population that's going to be served, bringing it back to understanding the customer's needs, and then understanding which of those risks from a security and fraud perspective are going to be relevant based on the best information that you have at the time. Dimension 2 is pretty new in the updated revision to 863 that's actively in progress. And the idea is that understanding risk really can't be limited just to cybersecurity and fraud. It really has to consider the broader risks related to privacy, equity, and usability. Now, by shifting step one, defining the online service up to be the very first thing that happens, we're hoping that usability and understanding customer needs and constraints is happening earlier than an individual conducting this kind of assessment is then looking at the relevant security and fraud risks when they're making a decision upfront to design or then implement a service. But as far as privacy and equity, what we really want to see happen is that after an initial assurance level is selected, privacy considerations, equity considerations sit right alongside those controls, and you're making decisions about how to tailor the implementation to the populations that you're serving. This doesn't necessarily mean that you are reducing security. It could mean that sometimes. It really just depends on the risk profile that you're evaluating and the risk that you're balancing here. It could mean that you are investing resources differently, or that you're hiring somebody who speaks the preferred spoken language of the population that you're trying to serve. But we really wanted to build into the process formally the consideration of these kinds of things. And then last but not least, you would tailor and finalize your control suite, implement, and then shift into more of a continuous evaluation and improvement mode. One thing that's critical for this community that is not a full gap at this point, but it's not as mature as it could be, is the measurement science. It is super mature in some ways, it is super lacking in others, and it's one area where NIST wants to invest more time and energy. We've included some new metrics, and you'll see that once revision 4 of 800-63 is ready to go out for public comment here soon. But just to give you an example of the kinds of metrics that we're thinking of, we know that pass rates and failure rates, are kind of a go-to right now. They don't really tell you the full story, so we want to dig into that more, but it's at least a starting point. We also want to figure out a way to get more feedback directly from the people who are having issues with the process. That is something that we can talk about in greater detail at another webinar, but these are some of the things that we're thinking about. We also want to think about how do you measure for effectiveness, do that in a continuous way, but also keep in mind that privacy risk piece. So lots of opportunity, lots of risks in pursuing this work. And I would say if you have any interest in working with us, this is an area where we're going to be spending some more time in the coming years. And feel free to always reach out with questions. Last but not least, and I'm trying to pick up my pace here. This is my last slide though. All of that to say, I think what I want you to walk away with is that identity risk management is really more of an art than a science sometimes. We're trying to get the science right so that people have standard predictable activities that they can implement to a desired effect. But we're learning as we go. We know that even not all evidence has the same strength, but we know that evidence-based approaches are proving more effective than knowledge-based verification approaches, as one example lesson learned. But just like the communities that federal agencies and other organizations serve are diverse, so are the risks that are relevant to them, and so should be the processes, tools, evidence, and technologies that we offer to people that we're trying to serve. I think this is certainly a personal view. I think it's increasingly a NIST view that it's critical that organizations have the flexibility to tailor their risk management decisions and digital identity implementations, should they pursue digital identity as an option, to specific contexts. And on that note, I will end my presentation there and turn it over to Liz to talk more about one particular context that we've decided to focus on, including with our partners at the Center for Democracy and Technology. Thanks.
Thanks, Connie. And I'll try to be brief so we can get on to our next set of presentations, but really appreciate that intro to NIST's work and the digital identity guidelines. Could you go back a slide, Jen? Thanks. As Connie highlighted, benefits programs may face some potential cybersecurity threats. And because we're really concerned about ensuring access to public benefits programs, we see an opportunity to consider these programs, their specific access and security needs and considerations, alongside the NIST special publication on digital identity guidelines to create a new voluntary set of resources tailored to public benefits programs that support human-centered and risk-based, it's hard to say, approaches to identity management, and can incorporate the perspectives of and experiences of practitioners and beneficiaries. I think it's important to say, and this is something that I will always say when we're talking about digital identity, there is no perfect or single approach to identity proofing or authentication that will work in all contexts. It's really about managing trade-offs to meet the needs of user populations. I think this is a really good tie-in to the conversation we're having about customer experience today. We can go to the next slide. Just to emphasize again why we're working on digital identity and public benefits, I think it's important to say that we believe that digital services for public benefits programs need to be both accessible and secure. And this, when we're thinking about the need for access, this is important because individuals' health and livelihood are often dependent on timely access to these programs. These can be critical services for financial health and inclusion, and a basic right afforded to residents and citizens. But we also need to keep these systems secure because they may be the target of sophisticated attacks. They also are holding and maintaining and making available often sensitive and personal information or data. And for cash equivalent programs, money can be stolen from government systems. We can go to the next slide. So with all of that context, NIST, DBN, and the Center for Democracy and Technology see an opportunity to work together to develop what's called a profile of NIST's digital identity guidelines tailored to public benefits delivery contexts. In this context, the term community profile or profile really just describes an example implementation of the common taxonomy and processes like that risk management model Connie was talking about found in the NIST digital identity guidelines. So the output of this process will be one or more voluntary implementation resources that empower state benefits administering agencies to take human-centered and risk-based approaches to identity management. Those resources could include things like risk assessment templates, checklists, beneficiary journey diagrams, and other materials. I also think it's really important to note that this project will involve a lot of stakeholder engagement, talking to folks like yourselves and many others from federal government, state, local, tribal, and territorial government, beneficiaries, advocates, other direct service providers, academia, and to an extent industry. And we're right now in an exciting stage where we're really continuing to narrow and solidify the scope of this project based on extensive stakeholder input to solidify both the programs that we'll be focusing on in this project and what we'll actually make through this work. And I should say that right now, the programs that have been under consideration include SNAP, TANF, WIC, Medicaid, childcare, and unemployment insurance, or some combination of those. We can go to the next slide. After launching this project publicly in June, we have started that stakeholder engagement process with a first virtual workshop to help inform our scope, including what benefits programs we're focusing on and our project deliverables. And we were thrilled to have over 100 folks join us on Zoom from across sectors. Some early takeaways that we can share from that is that there was a really strong interest in focusing this project to address integrated public benefits applications. So thinking about those online applications that allow users to apply for multiple programs at one time. And we were really excited to see that stakeholders who joined us on the first were putting a huge emphasis on prioritizing access and technology access challenges that beneficiaries may face at the center of this work. We can move on to the next slide. So we'd really encourage all of you who are here today, if you haven't already, to engage with NIST, DBN, and CDT on that project. Isabel has just shared a link in the chat. There's also a QR code on this slide. And you can fill out that short project interest form to receive updates and future event invitations, and let us know how you might be interested in engaging with this project going forward. And something else that I want to make sure we note is that in addition to and separate from this collaborative project with NIST and CDT, the DBN is also launching a new community of practice focused on digital identity in public benefits, which will be cross-sector and cross-benefits program in focus. And the community of practice will offer a more open-ended space for engagement on identity management topics in this space, potentially addressing key concerns and challenges across a wider range of benefits programs and offering more space for learning and dialogue on important technology and access topics. We'll be launching a community survey in September that gives interested individuals, potentially like yourselves, an opportunity to inform how the community of practice is structured and what we'll focus on first. With that, I will say thank you so much to all of you for being here. Really excited for our next set of presentations, and I will pass to Molly.
And I'm just going to say huge thank you to Connie and Elizabeth for the stage setting. And we're going to pivot a little bit now into hearing the state view of how identity and access, how access and security are tensions that states are dealing with. I do want to just also mention that we've got one really terrific question in the chat. So please feel free to put questions in the chat and we'll give people an opportunity to voice them over when we get to the Q&A. Molly, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Thank you, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are. Thank you so much to Jennifer and her team for putting this panel together. So I'll be, I'm Molly Libby, by the way. I'm the Special Projects Coordinator at Illinois Department of Employment Security. I'll be calling it IDES from here on out. So what I do is I manage the federally funded projects for UI modernization. So we had the, at IDES, the honor and pleasure to collaborate with USDOL on a research project where we observed claimants filing applications live, and we were able to ask them questions and monitor how the process goes from beginning to end. So just to start out with our project outline, our goal was the overall goal was to understand the claimant filing process and identify the pain points and how that would inform our UI modernization projects. So specifically, we wanted to analyze what was confusing or burdensome for claimants. Why would they abandon the application? What stops them from applying correctly and getting the benefits that they need? What part of the experience matters the most to them? What makes the biggest difference in the process, and how do they seek out the information that informs the process? So in recruiting for this, we found about 13 claimants from around the state in Peoria, Rockford, Harvey, Pilsen, and Mount Vernon. We sent them a consent disclosure approved by legal, of course, which just ensures that they know that it's completely voluntary. The PII will be redacted as it goes on to inform our projects, and that they can opt out at any point, and that the research, whether they opt in or out, does not affect their benefits. Okay, so we can go to the next slide. So like I said, we had 13 participants, but we wanted the baseline to be 5. So we really shot beyond that, which was awesome. We had a huge variety of claimants from many different situations, backgrounds, even like speaking different languages and different accessibility needs. So it gave us a very good like sample size, but because of the nature of the research project, the claimants all filed in person via an IDES computer with assistance from field staff. So I'll just go over our notable observations because we did pick up probably even a lot more than we thought we would. I did go over what we wanted to get from the project, but we did end up finding a lot about the claimant interaction. So bringing it back to kind of the theme of this webinar was the difficulty in the verification project. Most, if not all, claimants struggled with the ID verification and going through those. We usually use credit-based verification questions, and I've even looked through the questions and sat in our integrity meetings. I'm like, I don't even think I could answer these questions. I don't know. I don't have a mortgage. I don't know who's doing my car loan. So there's a lot of difficulty in those, and even though we know those claimants are who they say they are, they couldn't get through without an override from the field staff. Another issue was the lack of claimant preparation and no prior website review. When asked, most claimants did not even visit the website. And our website contains, all the information, or at least we hope to put out all the information needed to file, including what makes you eligible. So some claimants that weren't eligible came in and began the process and then ended up abandoning their application because they found out along the way that they weren't eligible. One of the most important parts, at least for me, was the emotional burden taken on by the claimant. It was clear that a lot of people were going through the worst day of their life. And I think that just adds to the difficulty, especially when it goes back to the credit-based questions. How are you supposed to remember who's your lender when you're crying, when you're upset? So there's that aspect as well. There's also what we've noticed is what I call the field representative hacks to complete the application. So one of our questions on the application to calculate benefits is how long you've worked or how many days you've worked. And so claimants will say, I worked at that job for a year, so 365 days. Well, no, because let's consider weekends, holidays. So when it comes to calculating that, if you worked over a certain amount of days, the field rep would just put in 99 or 999 into the field, just because that's how it's calculated. And most claimants don't know to do that. So you'd have to go to the office to be able to do that, which is another problem with calculating benefits. And that's on top of accessibility issues of just the difficulty of accessing a computer as a claimant. The lack of plain language in the claimant portal, and understanding the legalese of it all. And another thing that we've noticed, we actually had the privilege of watching a claimant fill out a survey. We do have a customer experience survey at the end of our application, and we noticed that this claimant, who did have difficulty getting through the process, said that they had no difficulty, even though we just watched them have difficulty. So that helped us inform how we want to restructure our surveys so that claimants feel more comfortable being honest and transparent in how they've processed. We can do next. Okay. So this project, even though we did it last year, has informed all of our UI modernization projects. We're currently working on restructuring our claimant portal. We're developing a plain language authoring tool, and we're doing equity research to develop a survey that will help continue to inform equitable access to benefits. So using these 13 videos that are redacted, of course, they've been used to inform all of these projects, along with our existing data from our CX survey. And it's honestly, like, I cannot recommend doing this type of research for your own agency or state enough, because it feels like had we not done something like this, it would be kind of going in blind. If you don't have that fundamental understanding of the claimant experience, then you don't really fully understand their needs. But yeah, that's I'll be able to take questions at the end, but that was just our research project, and how it has informed our ID verification development, among other things.
Thanks, Molly. It'll be fun to ask some questions at the end. I'm sure people have some too, and I've got some ready for you as well. But I'm going to say thank you and pass it over to Ruthie.
Thanks, Molly. I just wanted to say I really appreciated you highlighting how emotional this process can be and how that makes things like identity verification harder. And I can also say when we play video or audio recordings, it makes such a huge difference for deeper insight and buy-in. So really resonate with a lot of what you shared. Today, I'm going to talk about some of the ways we made identity verification significantly simpler for New Jersey residents applying for unemployment insurance, which I will also refer to as UI. And the key things I want to highlight are that 1, we tackled this from multiple angles at the same time, and 2, we took a very iterative approach to making this better. I'll talk through some examples of how, but first I want to set the context. So in the pandemic, benefits programs were both a critically important safety net and also, unfortunately, a key target for fraud. We decided that we wanted to add an additional layer of protection to ensure that New Jersey residents got the benefits they were entitled to. This was also something that became a federal requirement. This was something we had previously tried back in 2014 with knowledge-based verification, but it didn't work great for us. And just to benchmark, we had about 50% false positives with knowledge-based verification versus under 10% that we see now. So we didn't have anything in place when the pandemic started. We wanted a solution that offered high levels of protection and low levels of false positives. And we also wanted to make sure that 1, we didn't prevent people from accessing unemployment. 2, it was not discriminatory against people without things like credit history and varying levels of comfort with technology. And 3, didn't add a significant burden to people applying for benefits and to our staff who helps them through this process. So spoiler alert, we didn't get there right away, but we are getting better now. We went with IDME, which offers an IAL2 certified self-service verification, also a non-biometric option with a trusted referee, and an in-person verification in collaboration with UPS. So again, meeting our residents where they were at and allowing them to verify in the method that felt most comfortable for them. You can go to the next slide. Thanks. I wanted to show a high-level diagram of what the process looks like in unemployment. And the key thing I want to highlight here is that we don't put identity verification as a requirement before you submit an application. We very explicitly did not want to block people from applying for unemployment because of identity verification. And we know that a lot of people get stuck in that process. We didn't want to lose them in our support queues or in IDME support queues. Also, the date of claim is really important for determining your unemployment benefits. So we didn't want to do anything that would impact that. And this probably made things more challenging for our staff than if everybody who went through the application process, the intake application process was already verified. We decided that this approach would remove significant barriers for the claimant, and we prioritized that. So the key takeaway here is just where you do verification in the process is a choice. Once we implemented identity verification, we started hearing pretty much right away from both claimants and support agents that our users were seriously struggling. About 1/5 of our support calls were about this issue, and those calls took significantly longer than average for a support agent to help a claimant through the process. This impacted our timeliness metrics. In other words, what % of claims are paid within 21 days was the #1 issue our staff was telling us about. And I just want to highlight that it was really important for us to spend time with our support staff to get a better understanding of the questions they were hearing and the challenges they were seeing. Some members of our staff were really upset that we implemented identity verification because they firsthand saw how much people were struggling with it. So letting them know that we heard them and we were making changes based on their feedback was key. I wanted to highlight some of the feedback and questions we were hearing from our claimants. Were they done with the process? What came next? Frustration they weren't able to move forward, etc. This was from people who knew the reason they were stuck was because of identity verification. But there were also many people who were stuck and didn't know why they were stuck and that it was because they hadn't verified their identity successfully. We collected this feedback in a form we have on the bottom of our claim status page that asks people if they found what they were looking for and allows them to share free text comments that we review. This, along with a survey that we send out to users after completing their intake application and regular user research in collaboration with community partners, helps us get a pulse on how our claimants are doing. We also keep an eye about what people say about unemployment insurance in New Jersey on forums such as Reddit and Facebook. This gave us further indication that people were struggling with identity verification. And just to take a step back from this problem specifically, one challenge that we face is that we don't always have easily available metrics to understand where in the process someone is struggling. There's a few reasons why. Unemployment insurance is not necessarily a linear journey. And so you can't totally cut out, like, this is where in the funnel everybody is dropping off, or people tend to drop off here, here, here. There's challenges of getting data out of the mainframe, and there's also challenges of implementing analytics and legacy systems. We've made a lot of strides on this in the last year and a half, but qualitative feedback from forums like this and from conversations with claimants and agents really helps us understand these issues much better. And there also has to be an element of running an experiment without the perfect data to back it up, and using that data on whether it impacts the process to understand how much of an issue something is and how we might start addressing it. To recap, these are some of the ways people got stuck. Some of this friction helped us catch true fraud cases, and some of it held up legitimate claims. And so we realized the simpler we could make this process, the more easily we could understand which were the truly fraudulent claims and which people were just confused, and how could we keep targeting that to make them hopefully less confused and more empowered through this process. So we tackled this problem from a few different angles. I'm going to dive into these, but again, tackling it from multiple angles at the same time, I think, made a big difference for us in terms of the impact that we saw. You can go to the next slide. Thanks. So in the last 2 years, we went through a process of reviewing and updating over 100 emails to be clear, plain language, and action-oriented. And we've even used generative AI to help us validate the comprehensibility of our communications. This has led to a 77% improvement in people understanding what action to take after reading emails from us. You can see here the communication that we previously sent out before and after verification on the left, and our new communication on the right. I think it's pretty clear that it's much easier to understand what action you need to take, that you need to verify, and what to do after verification in these two new emails that we have here. And just to take a step back, we're huge believers in New Jersey unemployment on updating communications as one of the starting points for the changes that you can make to make CX better. It's one of the quickest changes you can get out to users to validate if they're understanding what they need to do and have the support they need. And so much ground can be gained just by making these simple changes. One of the key pieces of feedback we observed is that people didn't know if they were verified. This drove significant volume to the call centers. We also knew that if people didn't verify on time, this could potentially put their claim in a state where they would need to speak to someone in order to unblock their claim. We've made significant strides in improving our call times and modernizing our call centers, but we still know it's not always as easy as it should be to speak with an agent. We also wanted to help provide as many self-service options as possible so we could prioritize agents supporting people who had more complex cases or who needed more help. We wanted to make sure that people knew they needed to verify, and that if they completed verification, they knew that it was received. So on the left, you can see our previous call to action. And then on the right, you can first see our claim status page, which shows people their verification status, and a call to action if it's incomplete. We took a very hacky initial approach here. We knew the email address someone signed into this page with, and we used that to check a database of emails we sent, letting people know that they'd completed identity verification. If the email was not in that table, we showed them that they still needed to verify their identity. Others, we showed them that it was complete. This sometimes led to false negatives, but we took like an 80-20 approach to getting more people through the process and decided to err on the side of sometimes showing people who had verified that they still needed to verify versus risking showing people who hadn't verified that they were done, because again, then they would be stuck here. And once we released our new intake application and new claimant portal in April, we added a call to action to the post submission screen, which you can see here on the right. This has led to a 20% increase in people beginning verification compared to the screen on the left. We're now working to add the identity verification status to our claimant portal homepage, which is the page you see when you log in using the work we did on claim status. I also just want to call out that the two pages on the right are somewhat duplicative, and that's okay. We were able to get the claim status page live much more quickly than our full claimant portal, and we use that to get information to people's hands as soon as possible and to validate what information and what actions would be most valuable for them. So just really want to emphasize it's okay to have an imperfect and redundant user experience on the way to having a better one. We also realized that the way we quickly set up identity verification during the pandemic needed to be revisited in a post-pandemic environment. IDEME quickly stood up a landing page for us. You can see the URL here on the left. It's not necessarily a trustworthy state domain URL. The page doesn't have significantly helpful information architecture and calls to action. Because we didn't have a direct API integration with IDEME, we couldn't do real-time clearing of claims. And also, because of the way the page was set up by IDEME, users who had previously completed IDEME couldn't log into their account and pull their verification in to tie it to a new claim. They basically need to do a brand new verification. This was bad for our users and also expensive for the state, which was charged for the price of a new verification each time that happened, along with being charged for the landing page. We'd actually written a policy requirement for users to verify once per year as a way to work around this technical limitations. And only once we started asking why this policy existed did we realize that this was really based on a technical limitation based on how the solution was implemented. And so by implementing a new solution, we could remove that requirement. We instead integrated with the IDEME API on a state-hosted URL that included FAQs based on what we heard from staff on where people were struggling. This has led to estimated cost savings of about $65K per month recurring for the state, and also unlock the opportunity for real-time removal of the hold on a claim once verification is complete. And just to highlight the iterative approach we've taken here. So initially, we just generated the same spreadsheet that IDEME was giving to us when we had the hosted landing page with this API integration. Now that we started building out that real-time pipeline. That work is code complete and actually is in production now, but not yet clearing claims. We're running it in production, kind of making sure that everything looks good before we fully turn it on. And so that's a way we approach kind of iterative development and validation with real data. Should be live in the next few weeks. Sorry, you can just go back one more thing quickly here. I just wanted to highlight the short link that we used for the new page. This was really easy to include in our mailers, both in text and a QR code. And it was really easy for our support staff to read back to users when they called in about IDEME. And so this was a super simple optimization that has actually saved a lot of time and made things a lot easier. And you can go next, thanks. So when we thought about all the different touch points we had for where we could let people know that you still needed to verify your identity, we realized that weekly certifications, the weekly questions you answer to verify that you're still eligible for unemployment might be an important touch point. When we quickly implemented identity verification during the pandemic, which was a huge feat of creative problem solving by our staff, we also accumulated some technical debt. One piece of debt was that because it's quite hard to add new database fields in the mainframe, we used a field that we already had called benefit year expired, along with another piece of data to indicate that someone had an identity verification hold on their claim, which would get removed once they completed the process, but until it was removed would block the claim from being paid. We did an analysis of errors people got during weekly certification, and we saw that almost half were benefit year expired. We had a hunch that some percent of them, maybe a large percent, were people who actually needed to verify their identity. We did a pretty naive logic branch where we checked if the benefit year was expired, and if not, we let people know that they needed to verify their identity. And you can see the two error texts here. We didn't go through a process of integrating with our ID status work, which would have been much more of a lift to get live. And just want to emphasize this update was a huge win for us because weekly certification is super important. It's the primary recurring place where people interact with New Jersey for unemployment, and it's what determines if and how much you get paid. But it also hadn't been updated for 3 years when we made this change. And so people were justifiably scared to make any change on such an important and such a brittle system. We were able to use a window of opportunity around an update to benefits amount in 2024 to release this change as a way to validate that we could safely deploy improvements to certification. And we also added automated tests and analytics as part of that to help increase confidence in future releases and to help us prioritize improvements. You can see some of our analytics charts here. We have a pie chart with different error types, and we've seen a significant reduction in both the benefit year expired and IDEME errors. And you can see a funnel we made here to understand the impact of this change. We're now working to do a total plain language English and Spanish overhaul of the weekly certification, and small changes like this made it safer to make bigger changes like that. We also added a mailer that let people know that they needed to verify their identity. If a claimant appealed this determination, we also added a way for them to indicate that it was because of IDEME, which fast tracks them to quickly receive the guidance they need to reopen their claim and complete identity verification. I also wanted to highlight this because it's not as beautiful and clear as some of the communication I showed elsewhere, but it's a start. And again, agile, iterative approaches, and reaching people in multiple ways are key to start moving the needle. This is my favorite slide. Results. We've seen a 20, I shared some of these metrics previously in the presentation, but we've seen a 20% improvement in people beginning the process immediately after applying. We've seen a 65% reduction in calls about ID verification since October, 65% improvement in people finding what they need on our site, which correlates to when we released the ID verification API integration and state-hosted site. You can see that jump in that chart here, and a 65K per month recurring monthly savings. We've also seen an impact on timeliness metrics and on staff happiness. And so in summary, identity verification has gone from being the primary issue for our claimants to being kind of a non-issue. So here are some calls to action I want to leave you with and some resources to get started. Thank you.
Sorry, I was trying to go off mute. Thank you, Ruthie. This is fantastic, and I'd love for us to be able to jump into questions. Jen Tracy, I know you have one that you posted in the chat, and would love to give you an opportunity to voice that one over. Anybody else would love to hear about what challenges you're encountering with customer experience at digital front doors of different agencies. And I will just also say that when Ruthie had her slide with the flow chart, I'm going to, Molly, I hope this is okay, but Illinois actually has everything before you actually get to an online application. And I'm just saying that because there are these choice points that Connie actually talked about that agencies are making about when and how and where to have the different identity verification and proofing steps in the process. So Jen, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, thank you. Just a little intro. My role is I work for the California Association of Food Banks as a co-lead, organizing over 70 nonprofits in California who are advocating for customer-centered design in the public benefits website that California counties have built. We're a county-administered state. So there's some extra layers here being county-administered, and the counties are leading this development. So my first question that I put in the chat was, we know that the CalSAWS, which is the entity responsible for building this website with Deloitte, they really follow these guidelines about security very strictly. Like, they reference them all the time when we talk about customer access and the need for making sure these things are accessible. And they're like, well, sorry, this is what we have to do to make this secure. And it's like, okay, we get it. Like, we've had a very serious security threat here that affected over 20,000 people's accounts. But what ends up happening is they just focus on building what meets the requirement, and they're not doing an end-to-end experience with customers. I don't even, when I've asked them, how do you account for customer experience in this process? I don't even get a clear answer. We don't even know how they work to understand what's going to happen when customers do this. And so we end up having to facilitate feedback, like what I put in the post, which is, people who have those free phones only get a limited amount of data, and then they can't log in to do all the things that they need to do because the phone system takes an hour to wait. Going into the office is not an option for a lot of people. So I'm wondering if there's a conversation about not just giving a security recommendation, but also that end-to-end piece of telling them, you cannot stop here. You cannot just do this and then wish everybody good freaking luck. You have to ask and make sure that you're protecting customer access all the way to the point of low-income people who we know have massive barriers to technology to begin with. And how are you doing that universal, targeted universalism approach of making sure that the person who's going to have the hardest time is the one that you design for? I can keep going, but I'll just stop there.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. And Connie, I want to throw this to you first, because I'm curious with the guidelines. Do the big companies, the big private sector companies where states have, big procurement project contracts like a Deloitte, an Experian, LexisNexis, do you have a sense that they are absorbing NIST's guidelines in good faith? Because I think one of the questions
Ooh,
in Illinois is,
yeah,
right, like
that's a
experience,
juicy,
right?
it's a juicy
Experience is a
question.
huge enterprise contract that is not just in the unemployment insurance agency, but it's, you know, it's across the state. But is Experian, you know, listening to, is it conforming?
Is it conforming? I won't speculate and I won't speak for everybody because everybody, even within these large enterprises, you have different motivations and viewpoints on this. So I don't even know that there's one monolithic, like professional services sector or identity services sector response. I think it varies. One of the challenges that I think is fair is how do you take something as complex as several hundred pages of NIST guidance just on identity and implement that when you have 25 to 50 other policies, regulations, standards that you could be using. It's just a very, this isn't an excuse. This is just explaining the landscape that people are navigating from a compliance perspective versus a promising practices and doing the right thing. And, you know, what are our norms? I will say one of the motivations behind this revision to the digital identity guidelines is to start normalizing considerations like these. That it's not sufficient to do the bare minimum. We understand that there is a ton of compliance burden that's falling on organizations right now. And also figuring out a way to take customer experience into consideration, not just early on, but in an ongoing way, is what the goal is. Now, whether people accept that, I would like to think that because there is at least federal policy that mandates use of the guidelines for federal agencies, that you will eventually see larger players in this space understand that, you know, table stakes for me to continue to go after large procurement opportunities is that I'm helping my customer, my federal customer, conform to this. And then to the extent that those policies or specifically our guidelines are made mandatory through other policies that are relevant for state, or even to the extent that there's county relevance, like you will eventually see this sort of trickle over approach. That doesn't exactly answer the question you asked, but sort of describes how I see the relevance of the guidelines, the direction that we're hoping to take it. And even more specifically within the guidelines, we do have normative requirements, and then we have recommendations. We have worked to strengthen the normative aspects of the language to emphasize that you should be seeing this process engendered. And if it's not, we'll see. We'll get creative and try something else.
Thanks, Connie. I want to throw it quickly over to Molly and to Ruthie with a question. When I was leaving Illinois, the integrity side of the agency was starting to work more closely with the service delivery side of the agency, and that's a good thing, right? That's where these data-driven decisions can get made, where you can analyze call center data. You can look at that live observational research, and you can see the cost to the agency and to the beneficiaries of these programs, that it's not like the security net is too fine and you're catching innocent people in that. But so Molly and Ruthie, I'm curious on the agency side, are you seeing more interest on the integrity side of the agency in looking at customer experience metrics?
Yeah, I'm definitely seeing that. We all meet regularly, also with Experian on balancing. I like what was said earlier, that it's less of a science, more of an art of balancing the importance of preventing fraud and giving people equitable access. So yeah, there is a line of communication there.
I'll just echo the same thing. I also just wanted to call out my colleague Jill Gutierrez, who's the director of the Office of Unemployment Insurance Modernization, who's on the call. And Jill has done a great job of really centering CX and all the work we're doing from new intake to mainframe modernization. And we've set up cross-functional conversations. We have a bi-weekly meeting where we bring in different members of leadership together, including people who lead the integrity side. Things like that really center and starting those conversations with CX metrics and centering those conversations around that has really helped build conversation around that. And we hear from our integrity team that they bring feedback to us that they're hearing as well, which is really fantastic.
Thanks. Any other questions out there in the audience? Any solutions that people want to share? LaTanya, you've raised your hand. Got the
Hi,
floor.
I was actually typing it in the chat and then you said that, and I'm glad you did because it was getting like to be really long. I just wanted to understand, Ruthie, you said that the agency, the example that you gave, you know, they didn't do identity verification before the application so that it wouldn't interfere with people applying. So what you're saying is like, it didn't stop them from applying, but it stopped them from what? Like it stopped them from collecting their benefits. Where did the disconnect happen for them?
Yeah, you would be blocked from doing weekly certification.
Okay, so they couldn't file their claims. Okay.
Molly, I don't know if you want to voice over, like, LaTanya, for Illinois, you actually have to go through all of the identity proofing before you can even get to the online application.
Right.
And what happened there is you have this massive boomerang effect of calls to the call center when people can't get through.
Right. And I'm thinking about that. So I'm with SSA and that's what we do. It's front end identity verification to apply. You have to actually have an account through our myssa.gov. But I wanted to participate in this because I'm, you know, again, we're all looking to, you know, refine things, improve things, make them better. And I just found that really interesting that for her to say that we didn't, you know, implement that at the application point, we implemented it later. So I'm trying to think from our perspective what that would look like, because it definitely would. I mean, I can totally see how it would make it so much easier for people to apply. But then for us, the stopping point would it would have to be at the point where they're approved for benefits. We wouldn't be able to, you know, process or pay them. So, and the other problem that we have is certain elements of ID, you know what I mean, are necessary, like citizenship, you know what I mean? There's certain elements or proof of age, like age has to be, you know, verified before we can even, you know, because it's an element of eligibility for like retirement, you know? So I'm just trying to think through like, if that's even something we could possibly consider.
Can I jump in for a
Jump
minute?
in, Connie. Yep.
So I think, LaTanya, you're raising wonderful questions. And I also hope that you join our project with CDT, DBN, and NIST all working together to do this sort of profiling work, because we're asking a lot of those same questions about sequencing. And one thing up front that I'll just say is that, like, making a decision around if a person is authorized and eligible, I would separate out from the full identity verification step.
Okay.
Right. So it's possible that you collect some light touch information to confirm eligibility, but you don't go through the whole arduous process where you run into the kinds of challenges that have come up for verification until after you've done that level of processing. That's sort of when I touched on like defining the online service. The idea would be that you're separating out that piece of the process that's lighter touch. And I just want to sort of make the conceptual point as well that we're trying to separate eligibility from verification, because we know the challenges are a little bit different.
Right. Okay.
But happy to talk with you about that. As you can tell, I will geek out on this topic at any point, anywhere.
Okay. Thank you.
You can
For sure.
You have to do it somewhere, right? The question is where, and you can design your systems and your business logic and your processes around whatever place you decide to put that. Like, it doesn't take away the need to do something to validate that, but it's really just about how you design based on those different ways you set it up. You can probably play it out.
Like that whole notion of sequencing, it'd be so interesting to look at the sequencing for multiple different benefit programs and multiple federal, state, territorial, local levels to see what those look like, what those choice points look like. For sure.
Okay, thank you guys very much.
Yeah. Other questions? All right, I'm going to move us forward and say a huge thank you to Connie, Elizabeth, Ruthie, Molly for being with us today. That was really a fantastic presentation and discussion. And then I would like to just say that we are hoping that you might consider joining us virtually on September 17th and 18th for our benefits conference, or BenCon for short. The registration for that is going to go in the chat. Oh, perfect. Thanks, Isabel. In just a second. This is 2 days of amazing content focused on excellence in digital benefit delivery. There's going to be lots of sessions on AI and digital benefits, digital identity issues, customer experience, and more. So we really encourage everybody to check that out and join us virtually in September. And finally, just want to say thank you for spending your time and energy with us today. We hope that you'll stay connected with us on social media and subscribe to our monthly digital digest and news. We're putting those links in the chat right now. So hope everyone has a great rest of their day, and thanks for joining us.